You are now listening to the Business Banter podcast, where top minds in business collide and wisdom is exposed. My name is Jack Kozakowski. I'll be your host for the day. My passion for this podcast is that you walk away better personally and professionally from the amazing stories that are told. Now let's get ready to banter. Super stoked for episode 2 of Business Banter podcast. Today I've got an amazing guest, New York Times bestselling author. You have to read Love is a Killer App. He's a global keynote speaker, and this guy has tons of wisdom to give you. He's a good friend of mine. I've known him for a long time. He's getting $50,000, $25,000 to speak. He's one of the most world-renowned global keynotes you're going to meet, and he's going to give away a lot of his wisdom around how to become a global keynote speaker, what it takes, everything it entails, and just, everything about being a New York Times bestselling author. I think you're going to take away so much from this episode. So let's get ready to banter. Okay, so I am excited today to have one of my, I would call you a good friend, Tim, that I just don't see very often. How does that sound?
I feel the same way, Jack. I feel the same way.
Tim is like just an all-star story. There's just so many interesting components to you, Tim. And, I just want to dive into that. So today, my key area of focus for the audience is to really talk and have a conversation with somebody who's at the elite level of keynote speaking. And when I say that, I don't say that lightly. But before I do that, Tim, why don't you just give your 30-second kind of elevator pitch on what you've done in your career. I know that's not easy to do in 30 seconds, but.
Okay, here we go. Technology guy, started out mobile phones mid-'80s when they first launched them, called them cell phones. Went to work for Mark Cuban, 97, beginning of the internet movement in earnest, and ended up at Yahoo, where I was their CSO for a few years. During that time, I wrote a book called Love is the Killer App, which surprisingly really got a lot of traction in business culture, especially with young folks like yourself, Jack, and that catapulted me to the lecture circuit later. I've been doing that for over 15 years, and today I live in Las Vegas, and I have a research company called Deeper Media, and we augment all of my speaking business with research and consulting business, and I've got a dog named Banksy. 32 seconds.
A dog named Banksy.
I do.
Podcast is over.
Every English person we meet at the park, when I introduce my poodle named Banksy and explain that he is a graffiti artist.
But it's kind of an oxymoron though, because then they actually know who Banksy is, right? So technically you can't really you can't name a dog. You can't name somebody Banksy that's actually out in the public, but that's a whole different podcast.
Well, I don't want to get diverted, but this is funny. I was in a restaurant in New York. My wife and I were talking about Banksy. It was one of the first times he was going to stay in boarding, and we said we wonder how Banksy's going to handle it being in that room alone all the time. This guy next to us, which was clearly an artist, was freaking out, and he nudged his phone over next to us with it set to audio record because he thought he'd cracked the code on finding Banksy.
That's amazing. So I just want to dive into this. So I get asked all the time, by our clients and, even my own self, I don't know if you know this, but I've had aspirations to someday do some, keynote speaking, right? I've done some other type of speaking. But what I've found is that, when running an agency and being in business, I absolutely have no time to go keynote, right? Just putting the presentation together is insane. But, the first thing I want to do is, how many keynotes are you doing per year with your business right now?
So it varies every year, Jack. I mean, at the top of the best year has been 100 plus. The worst year has been only 40. The average year probably runs closer to 50 or 60. It really depends on a lot of things, the economy, whatever topic it is that I'm enthused about at the time, and how big that swim lane is. But suffice it to say, I've been doing it for about 17 years. Let's say I've done 800 or so. Wow.
So just to get credibility out of the way on this, because there's a lot of people that say they're keynote speakers, and I kind of laugh at that, right? Global keynote speaker in their LinkedIn profile, which is fine. I'm not hating on anybody, but
that's like number one Amazon seller. Don't get me started on that.
Yeah. So we could go days on that, but I look at it like this, like, what are the brands that you're, a real keynote is, what are the brands you're working for? And here's the thing is, what's your price tag, Tim, if I want to get you to keynote on average?
Do not tell the rest of my in-laws and my family. Just kidding. If you Google me, you'll find out quickly my price tag is 25 grand to give a speech in the United States and 40 grand to do something in Europe or Asia or South America.
That's incredible. So, you've got a lot of people out there like, hey, I want to, I want to be that, right? So you do some coaching on this as well, kind of helping some up and comers, actually bigger names like we just talked about that are trying to kind of get in the keynote speaking space using kind of their past expertise. But, what's the journey on that? I mean, what's the right expectation? If I said today that I'm 25 or 28 years old, let's say, and I'm like, I want to be a keynote speaker, like, what's your first path of guidance and wisdom you give to somebody?
So you are paid based on the perceived value of your time. So if you are a celebrity, which I'm not, but if you were a celebrity, your value proposition on the lecture circuit, that's conferences and conventions, is that you put butts in seats. So Magic Johnson's getting 100 grand a speech right now, and he's booked because he puts butts in seats. And when you factor it, Jack, his average audience size is probably several thousand. So at the end of the day, it's like $5 a head to have Magic at your event. So that's a different level of economics, right? So at my price point, what I usually do is speak to, let's say 300 or 400 people. So the economics are kind of the same for me too. I speak for a slightly smaller crowd, but I'm not brought in because I put butts in seats. I get brought in because my background and my expertise, like the research that we do, can have a business effect on the audience. So I speak a lot about collaboration for companies, especially if they're really slow to respond to disruption. They're not very good at executing innovation projects. They're usually siloed. And so those executives see the value of me coming in and moving those 300 to 400 people to collaborating more as being worth $5, $6 a head. And that my time as a consultant who also speaks is worth it. Because if you came to Deeper Media and said, hey, Tim, I want 4 days of your time. I want a few days of prep time to give a speech. I want you to travel across the country for a day. I want you to give a speech and hang out with us for another day. That's 4 days. They say, what are you going to charge? And I say, we're going to charge 25 grand for 4 days. Because if you do our hourly rate at Deeper Media, it kind of works out to that because I'm the principal. I can only scale so far. So we've really built up a strong story about why my fee is worth it at 25 grand, but we have a specific market that we serve and we go after that addressable market, which is the corporate event circuit, very aggressively with that in mind. And so every speaker, you just have to figure out what's the value of your time, how can you justify the value of your time, and most importantly, what's the value of your presence? Are you putting butts in seats or are you transforming organizations? And whether or not that makes you a $5,000 speaker or a $100,000 speaker, if you get that story straight, Jack, now you know how to market your story because it's like any other business. It just happens that speaking is a monetization strategy for experts and celebrities.
Okay, so there's two takeaways I got from that. One would be celebrity, which would be, they're looking at ROI of you showing up, right? Like
well,
just
think
straight.
About Gary Vee. Think about, we've done events where Gary Vee was like the headliner and he was the glue. I mean, how did they get, a couple of thousand people to pay that money to go to Sales Machine a few years ago in New York? I mean, there was a variety of value propositions. You meet a bunch of people, you might get a job. There's a couple of speakers that are interesting, but you're there for Gary Vee. He's butts and seats, right? And even though there was other great speakers on that program, like Simon, like Seth, et cetera, at the end of the day, Gary brought big star power to it. And that's what made him worth it. And between us, I know that Gary's going for anywhere from 85 to 100 and a quarter a speech right now because he's so in demand, because he brings so much butts and seats value and real value too.
But so the second takeaway to that, like you said, is the immediate ROI on a ticket sale or the excitement to get somebody at the event and kind of use that for marketing purposes.
There's only a few guys like him that aren't literal celebrities. I mean, he's kind of a celebrity at this point too.
He's a celebrity. At this point, he's A-list celebrity. I mean,
Well, he started out as an influencer. He became an entrepreneur in the middle of it. He started at Wine Library, of course, and now VaynerCheck Media. But he's become a bona fide celebrity, not only because of the reality show, but he's the guy that broke through digital only to become a non-influencer content celebrity. So, there'll be more. Brandon Bouchard's, definitely knocking on that door right now. Jay Shetty is definitely knocking on that door right now. There are others.
Simon Sinek's in that league, I would say.
Well, he's in that TED Talk springboard. And let's talk about that for a second. So for those of you that, you say, I want to be a speaker, even if you've got a good backstory, you were at this company, you founded this company, you made this achievement, you sold $1 billion worth of stuff in a year, whatever the story is that makes you an expert people want to hear, TED Talks is definitely a launching point for you. And I mean TED Talks or TEDx, because if you do the right TEDx talk and TED proper picks it up, you get the same views, you get a lot of the same end of the day steam. Jack, I can't tell you how many speakers I see on the circuit. I just saw one the other day, Sean Aker, the happiness guy, that got their start, like Amy Cuddy, got their start on a TED Talk. Now, Simon got his start on the TEDx talk that went viral. So I think TEDx is a really good platform for everybody who aspires. Just understand these committees at most TEDx's and TED proper are super picky about, you need to have a backstory that's credible. What you talk about usually should be based on something only you would know and only you can prove. But if you've got that, I'm telling you, Jack, there's no better way to get started in the industry of professional speaking than a successful TEDx or TED Talk.
Well, let's dial that back for a minute though. So you have a New York Times best-selling book, right? And let's preference that, not #1 on Amazon that was gamed. You actually have a legit #1 New York Times best-selling book. How does that play into your journey, and how does that equate to somebody else that's kind of up and coming? Would you say start with a book? Did that help?
It certainly helped, and it's sustained. I'm not sure it started me, but it's sustained. So what happened, and I don't think I've told this often, but what happened was I was still at Yahoo. I was CSO at the time. We were just getting over the dot-com crash. It's late 2001. I had done a side deal with Random House to do a book. I did it on my own time. I had a writing partner that helped me get it out. They sent a copy to the editors at Fast Company who loved it. They decided to do a cover story. We did a photo shoot with legendary photographer Sam Jones, downtown San Francisco, me holding a big heart. They put me on the cover. They ran a 6,000-word excerpt from the book the day the book, or the month the book came out. And Jack, when I went to work the following Monday after Fast Company dropped on the shelves, I had almost 20 voicemails from speaker bureau talent agencies across the country saying, hey, we've got a client that wants you to speak at their event. That's how I got started. I wrote all the leads down. I went to Jerry Yang and asked for permission because, that's the founder that I had the relationship with. He instructed me to take vacation time, not mix business with pleasure, service the Yahoo interest in various cities that I visited because we were really working on our brand in 2002 at that point. And that's how I got started. And eventually I ran out of vacation days. Along the way, the book gets on the Times list and I keep getting more requests. And by 2005, I'm like, hey, I'm going to do this as my primary, job. And that's been the case ever since. So there's always, for speakers, especially at a higher fee, there's some exogenic shock that happens in the real world. You had a TED Talk that went viral. You had a book that everybody heard about overnight. You were on a reality show. You developed a platform like a radio show. But something happened out there that created incoming demand at the speaker level. So 80% of all the good business, maybe 90%, is controlled by speaker bureaus. Think of them as talent agencies for speakers, and they work for companies and associations finding content. And you get into that channel because the phones ring at the bureaus. So our job as a speaker is to focus on that footprint, that digital footprint across the web, or that real world footprint in magazines or on the radio, et cetera. So to me, that's the secret for really launching your career.
So, kind of to the next level of this, right? I go to, I've been going to conferences for a lot of conferences and, I've worked on doing marketing for conferences and helping book big speakers and things like that. And what I can tell you is that it's tough, right? It's tough to find good speakers. Even that, like, I've seen people that have, I'm not going to name any names because it's not how I roll, but I've seen speakers that, I know what they're getting paid, 10, 20, 30,000 bucks, come into a room and bore me for 45 minutes. And I can see that everybody else is bored, right? So I think there's this level of, okay, if I want to become a speaker, how do I actually create and understand the content that I need to create to be compelling enough to get a big fee, right? So what's the differentiator there when it comes to the content piece?
So the content, it keeps you going and gets you brought back, but your content and delivery doesn't get you on the circuit to begin with. So just because one is very talented at speaking in public or has done a really good job writing an effective speech, if there's not a story that the customer can tell their audience about why they should come see your thing, if there's not a measurable impact afterwards, which is usually driven by anticipation, which is driven by the story, then it's hard to be in the business at all. But if you get the opportunity and you have that story and then they put you on stage and everybody loves you and they act on what you say, well, guess what? You may do this 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Because here's the reality, Jack. When you look at people that land on the circuit because they had a TED Talk, they had a radio show, they had something that went viral, they're only around doing this professionally as a sole source of income for 3.5 to 4 years. That's what the research says. And then all of a sudden you kind of fade back and you're only getting a few gigs a year and you start doing them for free to drive your agency or consulting business. And then you develop an online training course. And the next thing I hear, you're working as a corporate trainer. And that happens a lot. And I'm just being brutally honest about it. So to do it for 15 years, you certainly have to make those investments in good content and good delivery. Here's a few resources. Y'all ready? Go to the blog publicwords.com, publicwords.com. Best speaking coach in the world, Nick Morgan, wrote a book called Give Your Speech, Change the World. He blogs about this stuff every day. You're going to pick up a lot of good information there. Join the National Speakers Association at your local chapter level and do some networking. This will help you get your first couple of checks because they'll be able to find you a niche, maybe a more community-oriented event, but that's a really good place to get started. And you can also get resources there. There are training resources. So go research something called Heroic Public Speaking. Heroic Public Speaking is literally a small university. I believe it's in Ohio, and there's another one in Canada run by Michael Port, great guy. And they'll train you to deliver outstanding performances on the stage. So that's just a handful of things. If all else fails, just go read Nick Morgan's book, Give Your Speech, Change the World. Or if you want to write a better speech, read Resonate by Nancy Duarte.
Love it. There you go. That was worth anybody listening to this conversation right there. So, I'm trying to think about this. There's a whole idea and, about free speaking, right? And speaking for free. And I've battled with this internally because I've gotten asked to speak, multiple times. And there's an element and an argument that I've had with multiple people on both sides that says, if you speak for free, you're wasting your time, right? You're going to demean your value. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, at events I do, there's a combination of paid speakers and free speakers. And, sometimes the people that quote speak for free, they're clients of whoever's hosting the event. They've been asked to do it as a favor. Sometimes it's really good for them to get some exposure. And, certainly when you're a speaker at an event, you have much more networking power. People want to talk to you. So there's some value there. But here's the issue. It's all about fee integrity. So either you're a professional speaker or you are a professional who leverages speaking to grow your business. They're two different animals altogether, Jack. The professional speaker spends an enormous amount of time on each event. For those of you listening, if you want to know how I prepare for events and the work I put into giving these keynotes, just visit timsanders.com/prep. That's timsanders.com/prep. You'll see a video that lays it out for you, but I'm not kidding. 4 days. As a professional speaker, 4 days or more, sometimes as much as 8 days, like this thing I'm doing next week in New York, go into a single 45-minute talk. Because I take custom assignments now as a researcher. I'm doing a talk next week in New York for a big hospital on the impact of incivility, those little rudenesses in a culture that's just poison. And so there's a lot of work. When you're doing a free speech, usually you're doing your can to prezo. It's the thing you've got about your agency. It's the take you've got on marketing, whatever it is. You pretty much give that talk every time. Your time investment as a free speaker usually is just getting to the event, giving your talk. So it's just a different animal. So if you are speaking for pay, then you need to stick with your guns as best as possible. The accepted exception to this, Jack, is when you release a book. And you know that, right? So when you release a book, you need to get out in front of a lot of people while the publisher still cares in that short window that determines whether or not the book's going to get traction. And then the rules change. And you'll speak on a street corner for 50 people if you can move 50 units on a Tuesday at 9 a.m. That's just a different business, but it's very temporary. You must shut that off and go back to your regular fee basis. And the reason why is because the clients that write you checks, they don't take too kindly to knowing that if they'd asked you to speak for free and give you a booth and promoted you a little bit, you would have done it that way. So you just have to have a sense of the integrity, especially if you're going to do this for a long time, especially if your success, like mine, depends on speaking for the same organization on the average 3 times during your career.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point because, at our agency, we've worked with multiple authors and, helping them kind of push their book sales for a launch. And what I've found is, a lot of it's just getting the momentum and getting people talking about you. And until you get that, people don't want to pay you for that, right? They don't want to pay for you to get the momentum. They want to pay after you have the momentum. That's when they want to pay you the big bucks.
Yeah, and there's not necessarily a connection with having a book and having a speaking career unless the book gets a lot of discussion and buzz, and then it does, right? So it's not that you wrote a good book or that a year ago it was a bestseller, now we're going to pick him. It's that I've heard of that book. My audience has heard of that book. So it gets back to this issue of digital footprint. But I'll say this. I did 25, 30 presentations when I was working for cubansbroadcast.com or working at Yahoo, absolutely free. It was part of how our company outreach to the market. At Broadcast, I talked about the future of video on the internet. At Yahoo, I largely talked about what I call the experience, what Joe Pine called the experience economy at the time, and why we need to think about, customer experience design. But that was part of the Yahoo strategy around how we went to market with digital marketing solutions. So in both cases, I did a lot of gigs for the company I worked for as a PR move, and that got my chops. So then when this Fast Company thing happened and my phone started to ring, I didn't go from suck to not suck to good to great. It's like I was able to kind of transition because I'd already been doing it. So my message is, while you're waiting on your story to develop, do take the opportunity to give those presentations, especially as they constitute what our friends at Corporate Executive Board Gartner call commercial teaching. Have you heard that phrase, Jack?
No, that's a new one to me.
So commercial teaching comes from the Challenger sale, right? So Brent, and all the guys there. So Matthew Dixon, et cetera. So they call commercial teaching content that you publish that is educational and insightful, but it leads the reader, the listener, back to your value proposition. So
what's the biggest crowd, like the biggest and most exciting crowd company that you've spoken in front of?
Biggest crowd would probably be the Catalyst conference in Atlanta. The first time I did it, I think it was like 13,500. It was in Atlanta at a big, huge convention center kind of thing. And that was exciting because John Maxwell had brought me in and I was kind of new in my career. And I came back and did it later. It's always hard to have the same impact both times, but that was super exciting. Love is a Killer app was really fresh, and this crowd had never heard a business guy talk about love before. So it was really an amazing experience. And then I got to say, as far as gigs that I really enjoyed the experience of being a speaker, in 2010, I got booked by Unilever Brazil because the book really worked in Brazil. It's my #2 market in the world. And I went to the World Cup and I went to Cape Town, South Africa. This is 2010. So I got to experience all of that culture and all of the buzz for the World Cup, even though that speech was only for like 100 grocery store owners in South America who were the guests of Unilever Brazil. The experience was just incredible. So sometimes it's the size of the crowd and other times it's the size of the experience. But what we do is really fun from that standpoint. You get the ups and downs, and my audiences range this year from 100 to, I think the biggest crowd I'll do this year is like 5K.
So I think one of the things that, people kind of look at the speaking thing is maybe like fame, and, lots of people like want to know who you are and talk to you, and, you gain followers and all that stuff. But, talk about the element of like the downside of it. So there's a lot of traveling, right? Like I hate traveling. I don't be traveling all the time. How's that element, and just give people the reality of what the downside is of it.
I'll give you a grim statement and take this with a grain of salt. When they list my cause of death, they'll say professional speaking. And I'm not kidding. Say, what's the cause of death? Too much travel. Right now, I'm coming up on 8 million miles, frequent traveler miles across the different airlines. That's about 8 million. I have health issues that have been developed specifically because of flying. I'm constantly on the alert for deep vein thrombosis. If you Google that, DVT happens to frequent travelers. I have high blood pressure now. I have to get up sometimes at 4 a.m. in New York. I live in Las Vegas. When I got in the night before at 8 and had to go to a client reception. So do the math. I got to get up at 4 so I can make a 7 a.m. sound check, so I can give an 8 a.m. speech, which is really 5 a.m. in my body. And I'm going to do this 30, 40, 50 times a year. And that doesn't even count when I fly to Dubai or fly to Mumbai or wherever it is I'm flying that's really far away. So your body is absolutely devastated by this. I look at people like my buddy Mark Schulman, the drummer for Pink, and he also does a little speaking. I look at my buddies who are in bands, and I'm almost envious of how wonderful that idea is, that you've got a tour bus and you go from gig to gig to gig and you drive a little bit. Not me. I slingshot from the Silicon Valley to New York, and then back down to Atlanta, then over to Seattle, then maybe over to Montreal, and then back down to Dallas, and then back home in Vegas, and that's 6 days. And it's nuts. So you get a lot of travel, you catch a lot of cold. So there's a lot of physical sacrifice. That's number one. Number two, there's always a speaker that's more popular, better paid, and better liked than you, no matter how big you get. I don't care who you are. There's always somebody bigger, right? I mean, we look up to people like Simon and Seth, but they got to look up to people like Barack and Bill Clinton or Magic Johnson, or those people, because they're bigger and better. So that's a second thing. So your ego is never gonna not be bruised in our business, because there's always somebody else that you're gonna wish you had what they had. But here's the third and most important thing. You can't have a sick day and you can never bomb in our business. If you have a sick day and miss a gig, you're out of business. The agents will find somebody else. There's a new TED talker born every week. If you ever bomb at a gig, it goes viral. No meeting planner wants to book a speaker who didn't do a good job at somebody else's event. So the pressure is just, Jack, I can't describe to you the pressure, because unlike a band that tours, where forgiving fans come out and love their material and sing every word, 80% of my gigs, I've been introduced to their culture. And they're getting used to who I am and who my story is, and I have to earn their respect in the first 5 to 10 minutes. And that's a weekly, bi-weekly, tri-weekly thing. So the pressure is crazier than you think. All that being said, it's extremely rewarding to know that you can dip into a situation, share your life's work, make a measurable difference, get mails for them later on. And if you look at it that way, the sacrifice is worth it. But I'm telling you, anyone who thinks they're escaping the physical and intellectual and social pressures of like being an executive or an entrepreneur by speaking, they don't understand the business. It's just as hard, if not harder.
And I mean, sometimes we got to talk about that stuff, right? I mean, it looks like glitz and glamour, but I mean, in reality, everything, the other thing is you didn't talk about this, but I'm sure this is huge on you. I know you got a beautiful wife, and, you have to sacrifice a lot of time with your family.
You do, and you have to develop a lot of good habits of communication and restoration and other such. I've had the fortune of being able to bring her with me to some of the better ones, where it's bucket list city like Helsinki, or a really nice place to go for a few days, like
Burning Man.
Yeah, but I don't want to sound like I'm picking on cities, because we know how uncool that is. But I don't take gigs where I think that she's not going to have a good time. So we pick and choose. But yeah, there's a lot of challenge there too, because we just flat out travel as much as an executive at a public company. I think they travel as much or more too. But Jack, you and I know that nobody travels more than the enterprise salesperson. So it's part of.
I would say the enterprise sales trainer. I mean, I got a lot of good friends in the
Yeah,
sales.
exactly. That's actually a great distinction. The enterprise trainer, that's the poor folk that's really spending time on planes, and they're flying in the back of the bus and they're staying at the Best Western, so they're not getting nearly the perks that I'm getting. So my heart goes out to them.
So I know we're getting close on time, but one of the I always like to hear the good and the bad, and one of the things I'd like to hear is who are some of the coolest people you've been able to meet and at your speaking gigs, and what's the future of this look like for you? Like, how many more years do you have, and where do you see yourself going next as far as your career?
Yeah, so I'll answer that directly. So I think I can probably do 7 to 10 more years at the pace I'm doing, and then I'm going to fade back like Lou Holtz. Do less gigs, do a few that are local here in Vegas, and hopefully by 70, I'm done, right? So that's my goal. But we'll see. When I really think about, when you look at this business and you kind of think about the good, the bad, and the ugly, just understand that if you feel like you were born to share content with people and you want to make that a livelihood, I sincerely believe that working the convention and meeting circuit is one of the best ways to get there. It's going to be one of the strongest monetization strategies. And you're going to have to work on your craft. You're going to have to work on your craft every single week, every single day, continuing to develop new content, continuing to be willing to do the really hard work, Jack, in our business. Like, I'll tell you one thing I do. That's like one of my coaches got me doing. It's the hardest thing I do. When I go to a gig, I take my little GoPro Hero and I got this little box that it goes in. So you can't tell there's a camera in the box. It just looks like a little box that's sitting over on the side of the stage. You know what it points at?
The crowd.
Yep. Do you know what I watch on the plane on the way home?
The crowd.
It's painful as hell to watch your entire crowd while you hear your voice and watch all their micro expressions. Watch exactly when they get disengaged. Watch exactly when they do get engaged. That's fun. She went to sleep. He's back on his phone. And then you have to go back and back. What was I saying? Did I lose them along the way? I mean, this isn't revolutionary.
But this is Tim. This is the difference between an elite speaker, what you're doing right there, and everybody else, right? This is like game film for a NFL football team.
Exactly. Or like you release a movie and they shoot the crowds at the movie premieres so they can change the movie a little bit before it ships to the mass market, because you go, oh, wow, that little detail is pushing away the audience. You took too long to get to the punchline on that anecdote. That research point is way cooler to you than it is to them. And that's where most of my changes happen. It's really based on audiences. And I don't take single audiences as the Bible, because sometimes you're speaking when they come back from lunch and the room is too dark and they serve chicken and there's a reason they fall asleep. So there's a lot of things you have to take into account. But if you're watching that footage every single time you speak, you see the patterns, and the patterns is where you improve.
So two things, there's just two more questions and then we're done here. Who's your favorite, top 3 favorite people you've got to speak with or work with?
Yeah, thank you. I didn't come back to that. I should be more generous about that. So speakers, you may not have heard of Peter Sheehan. I love this guy, Sheahan. His latest book is called Matter. He's just this brilliant guy, got this charming Australian wit about him. Funny, super smart guy, speaks a lot about innovation, overcoming disruption. I love that guy. One of my favorite speakers. I was so excited to see Sean Aker last week. He's one of those Harvard researcher guys that speaks faster than I do. And he talks about the empirical research around optimism and happiness, and how it actually precedes success. It is not the result of success. And that's, I believe it's Sean Aker, Accor. But just Google Sean and happiness TED Talk, and you'll find that guy. And then lastly, Seth Godin, who not only endorsed all my first books, he's always been there for me. And I got my first big gig where he generously gave up some of his time during a talk when he was a Yahoo exec and I was new, to speak at a client conference. It's the conference I spoke at in Carmel that got me the promotion and the transfer to California. It changed my life. And if you haven't seen Seth Godin, you haven't seen him.
I love Seth Godin. And I love you, Tim. So there's no
Love your guts, Jack. And I'm telling you, you've got a bright career in speaking. If that's the direction that you go, I'm telling you right now, it's a skill set that's in your DNA, and it's certainly a way for you to promote the agency by sharing proprietary agency perspectives.
All right. So this is the last question, and then we'll finish up here. The personal branding aspect of this, right? So like I get super frustrated. And I have friends that are in the business, right? And I get super frustrated when I see that they're not doing the branding aspect of taking a speech. And you're getting so good at this, by the way, Tim. So I have to congratulate you on this.
Hey, thank you. You've been a big influence on me taking it seriously.
It's like taking a speech and a 3-minute clip of something that is just absolute, that you said that was absolutely phenomenal, that has massive actionable wisdom, putting it in a square video, putting some text on it, transcribing it, and putting themselves out there. Why don't we see more speakers doing that? And, what's the upside for you since you've started doing that?
Great. This is a very good question. Good one for us to end on. So rule number 1, bad video is worse than no video in my business. Because when they see me, I need to look like I'm worth 25 grand. That's why you'll never see a video of me just like doing something at my house, up against a wall, walking around looking at my video. You'll never see that crap from me because that devalues me. That makes me look like a $500 or better yet, I'll buy you lunch speaker, right? When you see my stuff, Jack, I'm on stage and it's a sizable stage. And I feel good, I look good, the stuff is crisp that day or it doesn't get published. In those rare situations where I do candid, we just put one out today or yesterday on my LinkedIn, that was shot by Slam. Those guys shoot film quality stuff. We were in a nice architectural firm. We set it up, we lit it right. It still looks like it's worth 25 grand. So bad video, worse than no video. It's not about the quantity. When I put a video out, like we did yesterday, we do an embargo on any other interaction on LinkedIn for 24 hours so it gets traction. So I'm not crowding the top of my activity feed by liking somebody's stuff or responding or sharing something else. We take every one of these releases very seriously. And sometimes it takes 2, 3, 4, 5 days for the traction to hit and the video to become viral. So, earlier this year I had one, I think we have 1.6 million views on it. It took about 4 days before it kind of tipped and got past 20,000, and then that thing just took off. And that's when we begin to get on and answer every reshare by thanking them and kind of amplify it. But the trick is good video footage that you think will get a reaction. Splashio, and there's a lot of things. Headliner, if you don't want to pay the monthly fee, is a great little app. And that'll allow you to package your video for the eyes-only crowd on LinkedIn. I don't have any hard stats, but here's what I believe. I believe that 9 out of 10 video views on LinkedIn are seen and not heard because people are at work. My sound is on mute here at the office because I don't want everyone I know to hear what I'm watching or listening to. So I'm attracted to videos that have clear captions and have status bars on the bottom so I know how much more time there is on the video. So we have to take that very seriously as publishers. Use a product that adds the captions and not over your face. Take the time to edit those caption files so the right word is bolded, the right word's in italics. If they did laugh, laughter's in parentheses so the eyes-only engagement knows you should laugh too. Take that seriously. Here's the last thing, Jack. It's good video. It's packaged well. The headline is everything. I use a headline checker. I'll send you a link. It's a long URL. You can include it in the show notes. We test every one of our headlines for interactivity. Because on LinkedIn, the way their algorithm works is comments are gasoline for a video spreading. So comments are actually a form of a share on LinkedIn. It doesn't actually give you any more distribution for someone to share you as to comment on you. So you've seen my headlines. Go back and look at them all. Some of them are a little jarring. I had to get used to that, Jack. I'm not that kind of guy. I don't necessarily say things like smart people don't send emails late at night or don't sleep on planes, or what I just said yesterday, great leaders are designers, not generals. We think really hard about what we can package, as the one sentence thing that guarantees to get a reaction, because nothing kills video distribution more than a bunch of thumbs up or people privatizing their response to it, saying, oh, that was a good video, but they don't feel the need to comment. They don't feel the need to share. So that's a bunch at once, but I'm just telling you, take the time to think about your video and focus on a cadence of maybe one effective video every week, and you'll really begin to nail it. And the reason it's so important in our business to use stage footage whenever possible is that speaking is an experience product, like watching a band on stage. I can tell you that the singer from Cage the Elephant is the new Mick Jagger, but only when you see him on stage in a video or live will you get how right I am and go to his next show. So put out video that demonstrates you as a speaker people want to see.
Well, it's a form of acting in a way, right? I mean, you are the sole actor on the stage, and everybody's watching your story, right? I mean, what you say, how you say it is more important.
You're just a lot more lit, and you're just more lit when you're on stage, and you've got that big crowd. It's like when you get into this cadence that you're like in your bedroom shooting it because you got to pump out a video. I can see that on your face. And it looks a little desperate, and I'm serious. So that's why sometimes the free speaking thing's nice, because you can take a free speech where you know it's a decent room, it's a decent crowd, you're going to get all that challenge, your adrenaline's going to go up, and then you're going to make sure and negotiate to get a copy of the footage, right? Because most gigs, they got a video camera that's putting whatever you're saying on some screen behind you. That's where you can get all that early footage. And every time you get a speech, have somebody besides you watch it and come back to you with notes on 4, 5, 6 potential clips. And you'll see that over time, it's easy to feed that machine with quality.
Yeah, and I would add one thing is, especially when you're at your level, like you got to hire somebody, right? Like I see so many of these speakers that,
I got somebody.
Yeah,
I got a really good guy now.
And they won't go out and hire somebody to do a video person. Like, come on.
Yeah, you got to hire somebody, and you have to develop a style working with that person. It doesn't have to be a full-time person. I recommend that you go to places like Upwork. I found out recently as a speaker from one of these share groups, if you go on Instagram and you look for hashtag Chicago videographer, if you're in Chicago, or hashtag Detroit videographer, hashtag Detroit photography, you'll find local talent that'll come shoot your gig at a high level for like $500. We recently had somebody in Detroit, that was his rate, like $500 for 3 hours. He came and put up 2 camera 4K, got great stuff. I mean, 5 years ago, Jack, if I went on Craigslist or went on Google and looked for the same thing, I'd end up hiring some like grizzly guy who's been doing it for 30 years and he wants 4K, $4,000 to come out and do the exact same thing. Except my kid on Instagram's coming out with like a Canon 5D. He's getting perfect vocal look because he's, doing.
Yeah, there's more innovation too. Like, these kids, you hire them for $500 and like they come out with something just phenomenal.
You just have to invest in video. Video is your lifeblood. It's how you win gigs. I mean, I guess this should be the last thing. When you win a speaking gig, understand there is no single customer. There is a committee almost every time. It's 2, 3, 4, 5 people that are on the committee for that conference, that meeting, and you win a shootout. There's never only one speaker under consideration unless it's a celeb, right? So if you're like me and you're an expert, I'm up against 2 people, and it's a shootout. And basically whoever gets the video watched the longest usually wins. So just think about that. Go get the good footage, and as one of my friends says, earn the viewership 15 seconds at a time.
Love it. Well, you know what, Tim, you're an amazing human being. So with lots of wisdom. And I just want to, redirect, and we'll put this in the show notes, but where can people, reach out to you? What's the best kind of form of communication for you online?
You can come to timsanders.com and contact me there, or just connect with me on LinkedIn. Just put in Tim Sanders Yahoo, and I will be the first response, because there's a lot of Tim Sanders there, and you never know how their search algorithm works. But Tim Sanders Yahoo, and you will find me.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Tim. And
thank you, Jack.
Until next time, everyone. Thank you.